soldier. Now this happened because at some interesting encounters between Parthia and Rome, Parthia managed to succeed. One of the first of them was the Battle of Carrhae, which is in 53 BC, which was fought between a Parthian general and one of the great Roman triumvirs. There were three of them, if you remember, Julius Caesar, Pompey and Crassus. So this battle was fought with Crassus. Crassus happened to be the same gentleman who defeated Spartacus of the slave revolt 20 years earlier. Crassus was completely defeated at this battle, and as a result of his defeat and various other defeats, apparently the great Zoroastrian god of the Parthians got transplanted into the Roman legions. And it is the Roman legions which then started erecting Mithra temples all over Europe. You will find even today a number of Mithra temples all over Europe, including in England. They are all Roman. And the similarity between Mithra and Christian ritual as we know it today is really striking. Mithra emerged out of a rock. Christ emerges out of a rock cave after spending 3 days and nights in it and claims to be resurrected. Mithra had 12 apostles. Mithra, being the sun, had 12 constellations as apostles. Christ had 12 apostles. Mithra had a last supper before leaving for the next world. Christ had a last before leaving for the next world. And above all, the Eucharist, which is basic to Christianity and which is the sort of almost cannibalistic imbibing of Christ, the ritualistic wine and bread which are supposed to be Christ's blood and body, is nothing but an old Mithraic ritual where the bull is slain and ultimately the bull's blood is drunk and the bull's body is eaten, and you are supposed therefore to transmute yourself into that immortal bull and therefore become immortal yourself. But apart from these striking characteristics, there are two very interesting things that one needs to tell you. All of us celebrate Christmas, and all of us assume that it is Christ's birthday. It's very far from the truth. Christ apparently in the New Testament was born probably in May or June, because he is supposed to be born when shepherds tend their flocks by night in Palestine. No shepherd will ever tend his flocks by night on 25th December. It's too cold. Secondly, history records that 25th December happens to be, in the old days, the winter solstice, which is when the sun is at its lowest. So it is really Mithra's birthday, because Mithra is equal to the sun. And it is Mithra's birthday which is 25th December, which was a major pagan festival in the old Roman times. In fact, the Emperor Aurelian, one of the great Roman emperors, made it a compulsory festival throughout the empire. By the time of Constantine, and this is when the great change takes place, it was very important when accepting Christianity to replace all these festivals. So 25th December therefore had to be replaced. The best way of replacing it was to say that now we put Christ in the place of Mithra, which is why today we celebrate Christmas as Christ's birthday. Another very interesting thing, the early church all prayed on Saturday, which was the sacred day, which was the Sabbath day, the Jewish Sabbath day. It is Constantine who declared that it will be Sunday, the day dedicated to Mithra, which will now be the day when everybody will pray, which is continued even till today. So we see therefore that in the great tussle between these two religions, ultimately Christianity won out. But it won out only because it was able to successfully supplant itself into Mithraic ritual. And now we come, I think, to the last, I think I've taken up enough time, to the last part of the lecture, which is, we move now about 500 to 600 years after Christ and come to Muhammad and the great religion of Islam. As you all know, the Quran again is a revelation, just as Zoroaster was revealed things by Almighty God. The Quran is a revelation by an archangel, Gabriel, to Muhammad, and the revelation is over 23 years Muhammad lived from 570 AD to 632 and therefore was about 62 years old when he died. For the latter 23 years, he kept receiving these revelations, which were all put together and compiled into a book consisting of 114 chapters. What is interesting about the Quran is that it is the first comparative analysis of religion in a holy book, because it only restates the old Judeo-Christian tradition as it ought to be. For example, it rails against the fact that Allah has begotten a son. It says no, Christ was not the son of God. There is no question of Allah begetting any son. Allah is one and does not have any sons. Secondly, it also tells us something very interesting, that Christ was never in fact, he was crucified, but he never in fact died on the cross. Now with these two very interesting things, apart from these two interesting things, we are told that fundamentally the Old Testament prophets are followed, Christ is followed, he is said to be born of a virgin, he has all the great things that the New Testament say he has, the power of miracle, the power of raising people from the dead, etc., etc. But where do we now find anything Zoroastrian in this book? In chapter 22, in verse 17, we are told that there are people of the book who are Jews, Christians, Sabians, who are some Yemenis people who apparently were monotheists at that time, and Magians. So Magians, that is Zoroastrians, are expressly mentioned, and polytheists. And the verse goes on to say, they may dispute among themselves as to what is correct. Allah alone knows and will ultimately decide at the day of reckoning. So this is one verse. The other is an entire chapter called chapter 18, which is subtitled The Cave, where, interestingly enough, the great prophet Moses looks for spiritual instruction to a prophet greater than himself. That prophet is unnamed. You will find in the Quran, most of the prophets are either Old Testament prophets or Christ. There are a few Arabic prophets by name. For example, Hud, Saleh, Shoaib, etc. But this is the only unnamed prophet who is also not an Old Testament prophet. And this prophet Moses goes to for instruction. The prophet tells him that, look, I am going to do some very peculiar things. So you can follow me only if you ask no questions. Moses agrees. They set out on a journey, and the very first thing that this man does is, they happen to cross a river. He crosses the river and makes holes in the boat in which they crossed, so that the boat sinks. Moses immediately said, why are you doing this? He said, see, I told you, I warned you. You cannot ask me. If you ask me again, out you go. Moses says, I am extremely sorry. Please allow me to carry on. They carry on. In their journey, sometime a few days later, they get into a forest. And in that forest, there is a boy innocuously sleeping somewhere. Prophet goes and kills that boy. Moses gets shocked and says, you are supposed to be a holy man. Chap tells him again, look, I'll give you one more chance. You are obviously not a person who's supposed to learn anything from me. One more chance and you're out. So they carry on till the city of Baghdad, where there is a wall that is crumbling. And at the crumbling wall, apparently, the great prophet who is accompanying Moses tells Moses, come on, we have to rebuild this wall. So they rebuild the wall. Again, curiosity gets the better of Moses. And Moses asks, at which point he says, all right, I don't think you can learn anything from me. I'll explain the three incidents to you and then off you get. Each incident was explained by the prophet saying that, look, I, unlike you, am in direct communion with the Almighty. I was told by the Almighty that the boat in which I made holes, I made advisably because of the Almighty, because there were a whole lot of other people coming behind the particular person who owned the boat, and they have taken the boat and killed him, both. So I saved his life by having the boat put under. Second, the youth I happened to kill because he would have involved his old parents in some terrible sin. I was told to do away with him so that they would bear another child who would be good to them. And the third, The Baghdad thing was that there are some orphans and apparently there's some treasure under that wall. We have to see that that treasure is safe enough so that I, as trustee of that treasure, am able to come back and give it to the person, the beneficiary, when the beneficiary reaches majority. Now what is interesting is, immediately after this particular incident takes place, we have somebody called Dhul Karnain. Now Dhul Karnain means, and has been translated by every translation of the Quran, to mean the two-horned one. So there is some two-horned one who is mysterious and who apparently is a great king, who has in fact, like the Emperor Hadrian, built a wall in the northern part of his empire so that raiding tribes could not come in and peace would be restored thereby. We find in the book of Daniel, we go back now to the Old Testament, chapter 8, the third vision of Daniel is a two-horned person. And the interesting thing about that vision is that it is given by Archangel Gabriel. Please remember, it is Archangel Gabriel who reveals the Quran to Muhammad. So it is Archangel Gabriel, the same Archangel, speaking to Daniel now, much before, about 800 years before. And now telling Daniel that this two-horned one, he explains the dream of the two-horned one, is none other than a Persian emperor. Now if it is a Persian emperor, and historically we find that it is Darius the Great, not Cyrus, who strengthened the northern boundaries of his empire. So if Darius the Great is referred to, immediately after this thing about the unknown prophet or the unnamed prophet and Moses, I don't think it's a great leap to say that that unnamed prophet is none other than Zoroaster. If in fact it is Zoroaster, it will lead to a couple of startling consequences. One, Zoroaster's date, which is wholly unknown to us, will become fixed, because he is obviously somebody who lived at the time of Moses, which would make him around 12 to 1300 BC. And the other is that if it is Zoroaster and he is a prophet who is of that magnitude that Moses goes to him for instruction, then obviously the age-old controversy in Islam as to whether Magians are Kitabiyas, that is believers or non-believers, gets completely settled. Now, therefore, the object of this short talk, because I find very difficult, I could go on prattling, very, very difficult to sort of compress all this into the 45 minutes allotted to me. I have done my best. And I would only sum up now by telling you that what I have found in the course of my research, therefore, leads me to conclude that this long forgotten religion, Zoroastrianism, because now it has very few adherents, is in fact a very, very important religion in the history of humanity, because it happens to be the only link between the old Rig Veda on the one hand and the Judeo-Christian tradition on the other, together with the fact that a variant of Zoroastrianism, Mithraism, as I told you earlier, happened to vie with Christianity and ultimately gave Christianity most of its rituals. Thank you very much for your patience. I don't think I could carry on very much further.